It was August 15th, 2018. The Nevada desert heat already climbing toward 95 degrees on a small private exotic animal facility in an industrial stretch of Las Vegas. The air shimmered with heat waves broken only by the distant hum of overworked air conditioners and the occasional metallic clatter of enclosure gates. It should have been just another quiet day at the facility, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. A dangerous combination of nostalgia, stubbornness, and misplaced trust that would soon prove fatal. Jasper Hollins was a 64-year-old retired stage magician whose glory days performing with trained chimpanzees had ended decades earlier. Throughout the 1980s, Jasper had toured extensively with two particular chimps named Max and Charlie, dazzling audiences with elaborate illusions that showcased the animal's intelligence and apparent bond with their human partner. But those days were long gone, and Jasper's relationship with the animals had evolved from professional to deeply personal, a transformation that would ultimately cost him his life. Jasper hadn't fully grasped how profoundly time had altered both himself and his former performing partners. Chimpanzees have incredibly strong grip strength, up to 540 pounds per square inch, allowing them to hold on with a force far beyond human capability. Their agility and speed make them capable of rapid, unpredictable movements in close quarters. Most importantly, chimpanzees rely heavily on social status, and years apart can deepen mistrust, causing them to view even familiar humans as outsiders or threats. That summer, despite repeated warnings from facility staff, Jasper had arranged an unauthorized visit to see Max and Charlie at the private exotic animal facility where they had lived for over a decade. He refused to accept that his former co-stars had aged, changed, and potentially forgotten him entirely. Staff ultimately allowed the visit under pressure from the facility's owner, who had once worked with Jasper during the animal's performing years and believed a brief supervised reunion might be harmless. The facility sat behind imposing chain-link fencing topped with razor wire, a stark reminder of the dangerous animals housed within. Max and Charlie's enclosure was a steel cage equipped with climbing platforms and enrichment devices, designed to contain animals whose intelligence made them master escape artists. That morning, the chimps lounged in the shade, seemingly calm but alert to the approaching stranger. Jasper crouched low beside the enclosure bars, calling out to Max and Charlie by name in the same theatrical voice he had used during their performances decades earlier. He clapped his hands and gestured in ways he remembered from their old routines, believing these familiar cues would rekindle their bond. But what Jasper intended as friendly recognition was interpreted very differently by the chimps. To Max, the dominant male, Jasper's crouched posture and vocal outburst represented either a threatening display or a sign of weakness to be exploited. Chimpanzees communicate through complex body language, and sudden movements or unfamiliar vocalizations can trigger defensive or aggressive responses. Max began pacing rapidly, his agitation visibly growing as he vocalized low, rumbling growls, warning signs that Jasper either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. Facility witnesses later reported that Jasper reached through the bars to touch a colorful scarf around Max's neck, a prop from their old performances that the chimp still wore. It was a gesture born of nostalgia, but it would prove to be his final mistake. Max lunged with explosive speed, seizing the scarf and using it to yank Jasper closer to the bars. What began as a grab became a death grip as the powerful chimp pulled with tremendous force. Jasper struggled desperately to free himself, but Max's strength was overwhelming. Then the attack escalated beyond restraint. Max's massive jaws clamped down on Jasper's face, tearing flesh from his cheek and ear. When Jasper lost his footing and slipped closer to the enclosure, Max reached through the bars and sank his teeth deep into the man's throat. The bite was devastating, crushing Jasper's windpipe and severing major blood vessels. Facility staff scrambled to respond, but the suddenness of the attack and the confined space around the enclosure delayed intervention. Emergency sedatives were deployed, but several agonizing minutes passed before Max was subdued enough for staff to reach Jasper. By then, it was far too late. The medical staff at the facility arrived to find Jasper unresponsive, his neck and head bearing catastrophic trauma. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Security footage captured the tragic sequence of events: Jasper's cautious approach, Max's rising agitation, the sudden grab, and the violent struggle that followed. The aftermath left a scene of torn clothing, bloodstains, and a performance scarf ripped nearly in half. Facility managers expressed shock at the incident, but emphasized that Jasper had been repeatedly warned about the dangers of approaching the chimps. The animals were quarantined for observation following the attack, but showed no abnormal behavior afterward, acting exactly as they had in recent months: territorial, reactive, and utterly indifferent to the human tragedy they had caused. Jasper's family held a small private funeral without public statement. The incident sparked renewed debate about private ownership of exotic animals and the adequacy of safety protocols at such facilities. Authorities reviewed licensing requirements and access procedures, but found no legal violations by the facility operators. In the end, it was another tragedy without accountability. Just one more cautionary tale buried beneath paperwork and regret. April 14, 2013 began like any other day in Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The morning rains had left the forest damp and shimmering under the mid-morning sun. Beams of light filtered through the dense canopy, creating a mosaic of greens and golds on the forest floor. Birds called from high branches, insects droned incessantly, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at unseen animals moving within the shadows. Spanning more than 3,000 square miles, Virunga is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. It's a sanctuary for countless species, including the rare and majestic mountain gorilla. Yet beneath its stunning beauty lies a harsh and often violent reality. The forest is home to predators and territorial animals, including chimpanzees, whose intelligence and strength make them fearsome creatures. These apes, while fascinating, can be alarmingly aggressive. When provoked or when they perceive a threat, they attack with speed and ferocity, often with devastating consequences. The park is bordered by small villages where communities live in a delicate balance with the untamed wilderness. One such village was home to 6-year-old Dunia Sibomana, who lived in a modest hut with his father, younger brother, and extended family. Following his mother's death 2 years earlier, Dunia's father struggled to provide for his children, leaving much of Dunia's care to the community. Despite this hardship, Dunia was a lively and adventurous boy, his curiosity and infectious laughter endearing him to all. He spent most of his days playing with his 4-year-old brother and cousin, the trio bound by a love of exploration and mischief. That fateful afternoon, Dunia and the other boys ventured toward the forest, following a familiar trail near the village. Dunia led the way, his bare feet kicking up small clouds of dust as he ran ahead laughing. His brother and cousin chased after him, their voices echoing through the trees. The elders had often warned the boys about the dangers of the forest, but to them it was a world of wonder and endless adventure. Unaware of the watchful eyes hidden in the shadows, they played without fear, oblivious to the lurking danger that would soon shatter their innocence. Deep within the trees, a troop of chimpanzees moved silently through the undergrowth. These apes were the undisputed rulers of their domain, patrolling their territory with precision and vigilance. Male chimps in particular were known for their aggressive displays and quick tempers, especially when they perceived an intruder. This troop had strayed closer to the village than usual, their sharp senses attuned to the sounds of human activity. The laughter of the boys reached their ears, an unfamiliar and unsettling sound in their world. The troop's leader, a massive male with a scar running across his brow, stopped abruptly. His dark eyes narrowed and he let out a low, guttural bark. The others froze, their attention focused on him. With a sudden burst of energy, he surged forward, his powerful arms propelling him through the trees. The other males followed, their movements coordinated and purposeful. The boys were oblivious to the danger approaching. Dunia had paused on the trail to point out a brightly colored bird perched on a nearby branch. He turned to share his discovery with his brother and cousin, but the words caught in his throat. Movement in the undergrowth drew his attention, and his heart began to race. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, the chimps burst from the forest. Dunia screamed for the boys to run, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. The boys scattered, their small legs pumping furiously as they sprinted back toward the village. But the chimps were faster. Their long arms and powerful legs carried them across the ground with terrifying speed. Dunia could hear the thudding of their movements, growing louder with every passing second. He dared a glance over his shoulder and saw them closing in, their faces twisted in expressions of rage. The leader of the troop reached Dunia's younger brother first. The boy's terrified scream echoed through the forest before it was abruptly silenced. Dunia froze, his legs refusing to move as he watched the horrific scene unfold. His cousin's cries joined the cacophony, a desperate plea for help that Dunia could do nothing to answer. Then the leader turned his attention to Dunia. The first blow sent him sprawling to the ground, his face hitting the dirt with a sickening thud. He tried to crawl away, but the chimp's immense strength pinned him down. Dunia screamed as the ape's teeth tore into his cheek, the pain blinding and all-consuming. Blood poured from the wound, staining the earth beneath him. His left hand shot up instinctively to protect his face, and the chimp bit down, severing his middle finger. The world around him blurred as pain and fear overwhelmed his senses. The sounds of the attack carried back to the village, and a group of adults rushed to the scene. Dunia's father was among them, his heart pounding as he ran toward his son's cries. The chimps, startled by the approaching humans, retreated into the forest, their dark forms disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. What they left behind was a scene of devastation. Dunia's brother and cousin lay lifeless on the ground, their small bodies broken and bloodied. Dunia himself was barely conscious, his face a mask of blood and torn flesh. His father scooped him into his arms, his hands trembling as he carried his son back to the village. The journey to the nearest medical center was agonizing. Dunia drifted in and out of consciousness, his faint cries breaking the heavy silence in the vehicle. His injuries were catastrophic. His lips were gone, his cheek was shredded, his ear was mangled, and his left hand was permanently disfigured. The doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize him, though it was clear that his life would never be the same. Dunia survived, but the attack left him profoundly changed. His once bright, curious eyes now carried the weight of trauma, and his physical scars were a constant reminder of the violence he had endured. The boy who had once led his brother and cousin on fearless adventures now struggled to navigate a world that had been irrevocably altered. The forest, once a place of wonder and possibility, was now a source of nightmares. For Dunia, it would never again be the magical playground it had once seemed. It was a reminder of a day when innocence met the raw, unforgiving power of the wild and lost. James Harrington, a wildlife photographer from Montana, had spent 25 years capturing animals in their natural habitats across 6 continents. His work had appeared on the covers of National Wildlife, CAMAS, The Nature of the West, and other local publications. At 48, he was known for his fearless approach and deep fascination with great apes, gorillas, orangutans, and especially chimpanzees. His specialty was capturing their expressions, the almost human-like emotions in their eyes, earning him a reputation as one of the best in his field. In April 2019, James embarked on what he believed would be the crowning achievement of his career, a 3-month expedition to the remote Nyawenge forest in Rwanda to document a rarely photographed community of wild chimpanzees. This particular group had been studied by primatologists for years, but few quality images existed of them in their natural habitat. James was determined to change that. The journey to Nyungwe was grueling. After landing in Kigali, James endured an 8-hour ride over rough, unpaved roads to reach Kitabi, a remote village on the edge of the vast rainforest. The 620 square mile expanse was home to 13 primate species, including a formidable population of chimpanzees. His arrival stirred curiosity. Foreign visitors were rare, and a lone American with expensive camera gear even rarer. That evening, the village elder Mutara requested a meeting. Through a translator, he warned James of the dangers ahead. The chimpanzees were not the playful creatures shown in documentaries. They were territorial, unpredictable, and capable of brutal violence. A villager had been attacked just 3 years prior, losing an eye and several fingers. James listened but dismissed the warnings. He had photographed great apes across the world, gorillas in Uganda, orangutans in Borneo, chimps in Tanzania. He knew their behavior, how to keep his distance, when to back off. To him, the villagers simply didn't understand his expertise. The next morning, he set out with a local guide, Emmanuel, a man who had grown up in Kitabi and knew the forest intimately. Emmanuel echoed Mutara's warnings. The Nyungwe chimps were different, less accustomed to humans, more aggressive. For a week, James followed the rules, keeping the recommended 80 feet distance, relying on telephoto lenses. But the thick canopy made lighting difficult, and the images lacked the raw intimacy he craved. They weren't career-defining. Frustration took hold. He needed to get closer. On the 10th day, he told Emmanuel they were going deeper toward a community led by a notorious alpha male named Kigoma. Emmanuel hesitated. The group was unpredictable, rarely studied. But James had already made up his mind. James insisted, and reluctantly, Emmanuel agreed. They set out before dawn, hiking for 3 hours through increasingly dense vegetation. The humidity was oppressive, and James's clothes were soon soaked with sweat. But his excitement grew as they began to hear the distant calls of chimpanzees echoing through the forest. Around mid-morning, they found the group. About 20 chimpanzees were scattered across a small clearing and in the surrounding trees. Some were grooming each other, others were feeding on fruits, and a few juveniles played chase among the lower branches. At the edge of the clearing sat Kigoma, an imposing male with a silver-flecked back and scarred face that spoke of many battles. Emmanuel whispered to James that they should stay at the forest edge, observing from a distance. James nodded in agreement, but his eyes were fixed on his viewfinder. The lighting was perfect. Dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, illuminating the chimpanzees in a way that made their expressions come alive. But he needed to be closer. While Emmanuel was distracted watching a mother chimp with a baby clinging to her chest, James slowly began to edge forward into the clearing. He moved inch by inch, careful not to make sudden movements. His heart raced with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was what he lived for. The perfect shot, the image that would capture the essence of these remarkable creatures. He was now about 15 feet from Kigoma, half of the recommended safe distance. Through his lens, he could see every detail of the alpha male's face, the intelligent eyes, the expressive brow, the powerful jaw. James's finger hovered over the shutter button. Just a few more shots and he would retreat to safety. Suddenly, Kigoma's head snapped up. He looked directly at James, their eyes meeting through the camera lens. Something in the chimp's gaze changed, a flash of recognition. Then, what James could only interpret as anger. Kegoma's hair bristled and he rose to his full height, nearly 5 feet tall, but with the strength of several men. Emmanuel shouted from the forest edge, urging James to back away slowly. But it was too late. Kegoma let out a piercing scream that sent birds scattering from the treetops. The other chimpanzees immediately responded, their playful demeanor transforming into alert vigilance. James began to back away, but his foot caught on a root and he stumbled. His expensive camera fell to the forest floor, and that moment of vulnerability was all Kegoma needed. The alpha male charged, covering the distance between them with terrifying speed. James had no time to run. Kegoma slammed into him with the force of a linebacker, knocking him flat on his back. The air rushed from James's lungs as he hit the ground. Before he could recover, Kegoma was on him, powerful hands gripping James's arms with crushing strength. The chimpanzee's teeth, larger and sharper than James had ever realized, flashed as Kegoma bit down on James's face. The pain was excruciating, unlike anything he had ever experienced. He could feel his cheekbone shatter under the pressure of the chimp's jaws. Emmanuel was screaming, trying to distract Kegoma, but the alpha male was focused entirely on his attack. 2 other male chimps joined the assault, grabbing James's legs and biting into his thighs, severing arteries and tearing through muscle. As James Harrington lay dying on the forest floor, clarity struck. His years of experience, his belief in a connection with wildlife, none of it mattered. To the chimpanzees, he wasn't a photographer, he was a threat. Emmanuel survived by scaling a tree, watching in horror until the chimpanzees finally disappeared. When rescuers arrived, they found James's body torn apart. His camera lay untouched, its memory card holding the last image he ever captured. Kegoma staring straight into the lens. A gaze not of human-like emotion, but something ancient and unknowable. The photograph won posthumous acclaim, its raw power admired worldwide. But few realized they were looking into the eyes of the creature that had ended James's life. His body was sent home to Boston. Emmanuel never entered the deep forest again. And in Katabi, Elder Matara told James's story to every visitor, a warning carved in blood. Chimpanzees were not to be underestimated. It was a warm and sunny afternoon on July 12, 2018. The Riverside Zoo was bustling with families and visitors, their laughter and chatter echoing through the shaded pathways. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy lingered in the air, mingling with the faint musk of the animal enclosures. In the primate exhibit, a particularly lively crowd gathered, captivated by Walter, a 10-year-old chimpanzee known for his playful antics and uncanny friendliness. He swung from ropes, performed tricks, and even seemed to acknowledge the delighted cheers of his audience. But beneath the cheerful atmosphere, an unseen tension simmered, ready to boil over. Natasha Lee, a 32-year-old zoo handler, watched Walter from a distance, observing his interactions with visitors and the crowd's enthusiastic reactions. Natasha had always loved animals, her childhood dream of working at a zoo shaping her every step. She joined Riverside Zoo at 22, quickly establishing herself as a dedicated and compassionate handler. Over the years, she worked with countless animals, but Walter held a special place in her heart. Born at the zoo and orphaned shortly after birth, Walter had been hand-raised by Natasha. Their bond was extraordinary. She had been his surrogate mother, teacher, and friend. Walter's charms had made him the zoo's star attraction. Unlike most chimpanzees who often exhibited territorial or aggressive behaviors, Walter seemed unusually docile and engaging. Visitors adored him, and Natasha often spent her breaks sitting near his enclosure, speaking to him as though he could understand her every word. To the staff, Walter was not just an animal, but a symbol of what seemed to be a perfect human-animal relationship. Over time, this perception led to a dangerous complacency. That day, however, everything changed. Just after 2:30 p.m., an alarm blared across the zoo, a sound every staff member dreaded. Walter had escaped his enclosure. Panic ensued as visitors scattered, clutching their children and running for safety. The chimpanzee, normally so composed, was unrecognizable. He rampaged through the zoo, throwing objects, breaking display glass, and attacking smaller animals in his path. Natasha, who had been nearby when the alarm sounded, rushed toward the commotion. When she spotted Walter near the aviary, her instincts as a caregiver overpowered her fear. She called out his name, her voice firm yet soothing. Walter turned toward her, his body tense, his eyes wild with an aggression she had never seen before. The moment hung heavy, a fragile balance between the bond they shared and the animal's unchecked instincts. Then, with a piercing scream, Walter charged. Natasha barely had time to react before Walter collided with her, knocking her to the ground. The chimpanzee, smaller but far stronger, pinned her down and began his brutal assault. He clawed and bit at her face, neck, and arms with an intensity that stunned onlookers. Natasha's screams of pain filled the zoo, but the visitors who stayed to witness the attack were frozen in fear. She fought back with all her strength, trying desperately to push Walter away, but his grip was unrelenting. Blood streamed from her wounds as she called his name, hoping to break through his rage. Her pleas went unanswered. The once friendly chimpanzee had become a force of raw violence, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of wild animals. Zoo staff arrived moments later with the emergency response team equipped with tranquilizer rifles. Walter's relentless attack left them no choice. A single shot rang out, and the tranquilizer dart struck him. As the sedative took effect, Walter's movements slowed until he collapsed beside Natasha unconscious. Staff rushed to pull her from the scene, her body battered and bloodied but alive. Paramedics arrived quickly, stabilizing Natasha before transporting her to the nearest hospital. Her injuries were extensive, multiple lacerations, fractures, and deep tissue damage that would require hours of surgery. The zoo closed for the day, leaving a shaken crowd to process what they had witnessed. Walter, however, would not survive the aftermath. Despite being subdued, experts determined that his sudden aggression was likely triggered by frustration and stress stemming from years of captivity combined with the heightened stimulation of the crowded zoo environment. The decision was made to euthanize him, as the risk of another incident was deemed too great. For Natasha, the loss was devastating. She had raised Walter, cared for him, and formed a bond she believed to be unbreakable. Yet in the end, the realities of his instincts as a wild animal had led to tragedy. After enduring multiple surgeries to repair the extensive damage caused by the attack, including reconstructive procedures on her face and arms, Natasha faced a long and grueling recovery. Weeks in the hospital were followed by months of physical therapy to regain strength and mobility. The process was both physically and emotionally draining, leaving her with visible scars and a new perspective on the risks of her work. Despite the ordeal, she carried those scars, both physical and emotional, as proof of her resilience. Once recovered, Natasha returned to the zoo, dedicating her life to the care and well-being of the animals she loved. Walter remained a bittersweet memory, a symbol of both the joy he had brought and the painful truth of their final moments. Though her bond with him had ended in heartbreak, it showed the delicate balance required to work with nature's most powerful and unpredictable creatures. It was October 29, 2016. The equatorial heat pressed down on the cinder block garage on the outskirts of Libreville, making the air inside thick and stifling. Even by local standards, the temperature in the converted building was unbearable. Flies drifted through the still air while a rusted ceiling fan turned without effect. Raul Zepeda moved through the cramped space with the confidence of a man who had done this countless times before. But this morning would be his last. Raul was a 41-year-old Honduran who was an exotic pet breeder. though those in his criminal network knew the truth. He was a mid-level wildlife trafficker who had carved out a lucrative niche moving rare animals across Africa's porous borders. His specialty was primates, big cats, and venomous reptiles, which he sold to private collectors and illegal roadside attractions throughout West Africa and beyond. People who knew him described him as impatient, arrogant, and utterly dismissive of both ethics and basic safety protocols. However, Raoul fatally underestimated the unpredictability of his merchandise. Even adolescent chimpanzees possess strength 4 to 5 times greater than that of an adult human. Their canine teeth, which erupt during adolescence, can grow up to 2 inches long and deliver devastating puncture wounds. Most critically, chimpanzees under extreme stress, such as those torn from their families and confined in cramped, unfamiliar spaces, become highly volatile and dangerous. The adolescent male chimp in Raoul's garage had been captured weeks earlier, likely after poachers killed his mother for bushmeat. The animal had already demonstrated his volatile nature by biting a handler in the leg and destroying 2 transport latches. But Raoul dismissed these warning signs, viewing the chimp as just another piece of inventory to be processed and shipped. That morning, Raoul was rushing to prepare a shipment bound for Lagos, eager to meet a buyer who was paying in cash. Time was everything in the trafficking business, and safety protocols like proper sedation or protective gear were steps he often skipped. One of his helpers stood nearby watching as Raoul drew up a dose of leftover tranquilizer from an earlier shipment, ignoring both the expiration date and the dosage needed for the chimp's size. The helper said nothing. It wasn't the first time Raoul had cut corners. The holding facility was a dim makeshift garage, hot, cramped, and cluttered with stacked cages, burlap sacks, and scattered plastic bins. The helper stood just a few feet away as the crate containing the chimp rocked slightly. Raoul glanced at it and, seeing the animal's half-lidded eyes and sluggish movement, assumed the sedative had worked. But the helper noticed the signs Raoul didn't. The twitching fingers, the grinding teeth, the low, unsettled grunts. The chimp wasn't asleep. The helper didn't speak up. Raoul had dismissed concerns before, snapping that delays cost him buyers. In that world, questioning the boss could mean losing your cut. When Raoul asked for the restraint harness, the helper handed it to him, both of them noticing too late that it was missing a buckle. Raoul muttered a curse and decided to go ahead anyway, waving off any hesitation. The helper saw him pull open the gate, reaching in without a second thought. The moment Raoul unlocked the crate door, the chimp exploded into action with shocking speed. His powerful fingers latched onto Raoul's forearm, yanking the trafficker off balance with tremendous force. Raoul crashed backward onto the concrete floor, and the fully alert and panicked chimp climbed onto his chest. The attack was swift and brutal. The chimp pounded Raoul's head with curled fists while simultaneously sinking his teeth deep into his shoulder. The helper said Raoul's screams echoed through the garage, but he stood frozen, too shocked and afraid to intervene. Driven by fear, confusion, and weeks of built-up stress, the adolescent chimp was relentless. His teeth found Raoul's neck, causing massive bleeding. Repeated blows fractured his left orbital socket, and his struggles weakened with every second. Then his body went still after 3 seconds. After Raoul went silent, the helper finally snapped out of it and called for backup, and returned with tranquilizer darts. He found the transport crate overturned, blood smeared across the floor and pooled near the far wall. Raoul's body lay crumpled in the corner, face torn beyond recognition and neck soaked in blood. The chimp paced erratically, and it took 3 darts to finally subdue him. Local authorities were reluctant to investigate thoroughly. The facility operated in a legal gray area on leased land with multiple layers of plausible deniability built into its structure. Eventually, Gabonese wildlife officials confiscated the surviving animals and placed them in quarantine. The adolescent chimp was transferred to a rehabilitation center near Frankville. Raul's remains were quietly repatriated to Honduras, where his family in San Pedro Sula held a small private funeral without media attention. Within wildlife trafficking networks across Africa, Raul's death caused considerable concern, not out of sympathy for the man, but out of recognition that it highlighted a dangerous truth many had long ignored. Primates, even young ones, are not predictable cargo.